Good morning and welcome to the seventh session of our 2021 CCDEH training series. My name is Jeff Lamore and I'm the Environmental Health Director for the County of Imperial. I'd like to thank Hedgegrowth Software for sponsoring this year's conference. Just a quick note, all past training videos and the annual meeting have been posted to the CCDEH website under the video library tab. Tim's taking us there and kind of walking you through that. If you'd like to sign up for more sessions, please go to the events tab and select the desired session. Just a reminder, in order to get your REHS certificate, you will need to be registered for the session. And after the session is over, you must log into your member account at ccdeh.org and complete the evaluation form for the specific section you attended. We are asking for all session evaluations to be completed by November 5th, and certificates will be posted to your member account by November 24th. Please enter your questions in the Q&A tab below. We will answer them at the end of the session. Tim will also moderate the Q&A for this session. Just a reminder, the October 21st training session will be the Excellence of Environmental Health. Hope you all can attend. We have some great projects being presented. And with that, I'd like to introduce Marie Wooden, Sacramento County Environmental Health Director and our Emergency Response Policy Committee Chair. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Jeff. Today's session is CalEPA Emergency Response Today and Tomorrow. Our presenters are Jason Boetzer, Assistant Secretary for Local Program Coordinator and Emergency Response. He oversees the state implementation of the Unified Program. He's also responsible for coordinating CalEPA's response to statewide emergencies. Next, we have John Elkins. He's an Environmental Program Manager for CalEPA. He oversees emergency response refinery safety, hazardous materials business plan program, and the accidental release prevention program, CalARP. Next, we have William Jones. He is with Fed EPA, Emergency Planning and Preparedness. He is the coordinator of the Regional Response Team and the Oceania Regional Response Team and serves as the U.S.-Mexico Border Emergency Preparedness and Response Coordinator. We also have Greg Baisley. He's an environmental scientist with U.S. EPA Region 9 Superfund and Emergency Management Division. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Jason Boetzer.
Thanks, Marie, and good morning, CCDH members. It's our pleasure to be here this morning and speak kind of an update and to where we're at with emergency response at the state level, and excited to have our US EPA partners, our ESF 10 partners from the federal level joining us here this morning. And just as an introduction to our presentation this morning, kind of going over a high level of where we're at with the events over last year, this year, but also understanding we have new directors, new associate members, and going over, our capabilities as the state and US EPA, CalEPA and the BDOs, and going over our capabilities so all of you know how we can support all of you in an emergency. As we all know, emergency events start at the local level and end at the local level. And successful emergency response and recovery starts with understanding capabilities, resources, strong coordination, communication, and collaboration throughout the event amongst all the different stakeholders. And really, we've seen that over the last year. And I just want to take a pause to thank all of you for your just continued support, understanding that emergency response is an environmental health program. I know when I started in environmental health in 1999, we had our core programs: consumer protection, land use, water, solid waste, the CUPA programs. And emergency response was this peripheral program out there. It's no longer peripheral. It is a core environmental health program. And we're dealing with different emergencies each and every year. And, just I was looking at some fire statistics, so far for 2021, there's been almost 2.5 million acres burned in the state of California, 7,883 incidents, and 3,629 damaged or destroyed structures. Last year in the 2020 wildfires, there was 4.2 million acres burned, and 9,917 incidents, and around 10,488 structures destroyed or damaged. So this is 2 years of repeated, a lot of fire incidents. We're also dealing with the drought, which is a long and slower moving event, but impacting many of the jurisdictions in the state of California. We are currently right now a PSPS event for I believe it's 12 counties in Northern California. And also, as mentioned, Bill Jones is joining us now, I think, but he's an assistant liaison officer right now with the oil spill event in Orange County and San Diego County. And with that, just a lot of multimedia aspects to that event that we'll get into, from air, water, drinking water, beach safety. So I say all that is that as we go through our presentation, John Elkins goes through the presentation today, and Bill and Greg with US EPA, is that the coordination is really key and imperative to ensuring that we're protecting public health and the environment in not only the response, but the recovery aspect. And with these cascading events, understanding environmental and public health is a key player, and recognizing all of your efforts each and every day, and also and how we can go through this to expedite recovery and response in a manner that is not only protecting public health, but also allows all of you to have continuity of your operations and all of your existing programs while you're responding. So with that, I know we have a lot to present this morning. We want to save some time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John Elkins to lead our presentation this morning.
Thank you very much, Jason, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to start sharing my screen for my presentation. I trust everyone can see it, correct? Before I start?
Looks great, thank you.
Great, all right, so let's get started. Thank you very much for everyone for being here again. Today's presentation, what we're gonna be looking at is trying to talk about, what CalEPA can do, what the roles and responsibility we have in emergency management, and our BDOs. And let's talk about the BDOs first. I've worked for local government for a long time. I worked for the state government for a long time under CalEPA. I worked for the water board, and everyone kept on throwing out this BDO name. It took me about a year no one really knew what BDO was. It took me about a year to figure out it meant boards, departments, and offices. So this is, so we're gonna be talking a little bit about what's going on with CalEPA. And again, the true essence of what we want to do is to understand, to give you the information so that when an emergency does happen, you do know some of the information and you do know the capabilities of others, what we can offer during those emergencies. Now, the first thing is bad things happen. This is California. It's, when you look at California, there's a lot of emergency events have happened. And people think when people think of 2020 and 2021, they really think of them as, hey, that's just a dumpster fire of a couple of years. There's so much going on with COVID-19, with wildfires, we have earthquakes, we have power shutdown, we have all these events going on. But all these events also happened prior to 2020 as well. And I can tell you, in California, these things are going to continue to happen as we go on later and later. They might not be as severe, they might not be as bad, but they're going to continue to move on. But bad things do happen. Now, when it happens, we need to be ready. We have a shared responsibility to mitigate, prepare for, and be available to respond to potential and actual emergency hazards. Now, what we're talking about is not just emergency response. We're talking about emergency management. And that's different than emergency response, because emergency management is preparing, responding, recovering, and mitigation of those emergency responses. And when we look at this, when we look at 2020 and we look at 2021, we have a ton of different emergency events going on. However, and it's getting long and it's getting dragged out. But what I have to retell everybody is, keep the faith, keep pushing forward, keep moving on, because essentially this is our job. It is our job to bring the people of California back to a pre-event status after everything happens. So this is our job. Now, CalEPA's mission is to restore and protect and enhance the environment to ensure the public health, environmental quality, and economic vitality. Now, within CalEPA, we do have an emergency response management committee, and that mission is to effectively manage the public health and environmental consequences of emergency events through coordinated, agency-wide preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation activities. Now, we talked about the BDOs a little bit earlier, and I'll talk about them on the next slide. But we do have 6 agencies plus CalEPA under the CalEPA umbrella. And with all these different departments, offices, and boards, and CalEPA, it could be segmented. And what we don't want is to be in silos. And so what we do have a term, we have one team, one CalEPA. So everything filters through to having one mission, one purpose to bring everything back for California. Now, the Emergency Management Committee, ERMAC committee, is basically CalEPA as the agency lead, and then we have the 6 boards and departments and offices underneath. The Air Resources Control Board, Department of Pesticide Regulation, DTSC, Department of Toxic Substance Control, CalRecycle, OEHA, which is we'll talk about in a little bit, and the State Water Resource Control Board. Now, on that management committee, we also do have other agency partners. We do bring in Fish and Wildlife OSPR division. We do bring in the California Department of Public Health in that. We do bring in US EPA, and USDA will be presenting a little bit after mine as well. We do bring in CalOES, the Office of Emergency Services, and we bring in CDFA. We bring all these agencies together, all these boards, departments, offices, and the agencies together to have one voice, to bring everything together so we have one concerted purpose as we move through. Now, let's talk about emergency management as a whole. Now, what you're seeing here is actually a SITSTAT report that CalOES calls a SITSTAT report. So when the State Operations Center is activated through an emergency, they will start pushing out reports such as what you see here. These reports are usually 20 to 40 pages of just filled of information for different types of activities that are going on. Now, key points I want you to understand about emergency management is environment, and this Jason already talked about this a little bit, is environmental health and management do have an increasing role in emergencies, during emergencies, and especially following emergencies. Now, 10, 15 years ago, environmental health really didn't do that much. But in the last 10, 15 years, it has been shown that we do have a huge role, especially when you look at the current events like COVID, power shutdown. These are compounding and complex. I gotta tell you, I've been in the emergency response field for over 2 decades now. And I think back to the early days of my career, and we only had one flood to deal with. We had one spill to deal with. We had one activity to deal with. Now, in today's world, that's just not the case. Today, we have complex and layered responses. We have COVID. We have wildfire responses during COVID, during power shutdowns. We have all these layered types of emergencies, and it's becoming more and more complex. Emergency management functions are significant for pre-commitment activities, and labor are labor intensive and costly. And this is a big issue too. These activities are labor intensive, and we'll talk about the cost a little bit later. And all emergencies start and end at the local level. And this is what Jason alluded to. And this is a key point that you should take away from today, is that all emergencies start and end at the local level. That's where that's where the rubber meets the ground. That's where everything happens. Now, so the California Emergency Services Act. This is the act that basically created Office of Emergency Services. It established requirements and criteria for emergency management. It requires the state of California to have its a state emergency plan, and grants the governor and the CalOES director authority to make emergency proclamations. This is a huge issue. This is where CalEPA, this is where the governor and OES have the authority to make emergency proclamations and to direct mission tasks. When those mission tasks are given, those have to be followed. This act also pretty much is where it states that all government workers are emergency services workers as well. And that's a huge point. Now, how does CalEPA and the BDOs prepare for emergencies? Well, we talked about the state emergency plan a little bit, and essentially the state emergency plan establishes the emergency service functions, the California ESFs. Now, CalEPA is the lead for ESF 10, which is technically the oil and hazardous materials ESF. However, again, because we deal with the Air Board, we deal with Cal Recycle, we have all these BDOs underneath us. The oil and hazardous materials level is very small, and that's because it's brought down from the federal ESF coordination for significance. And CalEPA also supports 8 out of the 16 ESFs, and those ESFs are here on this next slide. The ones in blue are what CalEPA actually, as ESF 10 actually deals with, are involved with. The construction and engineering, the fire and rescue, care and shelter, public health and medical. The hazmat is which one we lead, but we also deal with food and agriculture, utilities, recovery, public information. And then on the other side, there's also the recovery support functions, the RSFs, and we deal with all of those as well. Now, CalEPA and emergency management as at ESF 10. So we have, with our BDOs, we have agency expertise. We have the subject matter experts in air, hazardous materials, hazardous waste, all the BDOs, and that's what we use for our as a go-between for the State Operations Center. We ensure internal coordination to support local and response recovery. We represent and coordinate the activities at the State Operations Center. And this is one of the biggest things that we do as ESF 10. We coordinate all the information up and down from the local level to the regional levels into the state level, up and down through our BDOs. Now, ICS, NIMS, and SEMS. If I know there's a lot of new directors out there, and if these terms are something that you don't understand, I would highly recommend taking some of the ICS courses, ICS 100, 200, 300, 400, 700, 800. These are crucial for emergencies. And what ICS is the Incident Command System. And this is how in SEMS and NIMS is the Federal Emergency Management System, and the SEMS is essentially a State Emergency Management System. And this gives us the framework for coordinated response throughout California and throughout the nation. And it creates standardized processes and procedures, including the mutual aid requests. And it essentially does all management of all aspects of the emergency response. Now, the ICS is typically done in the field, on the field level, but then again, remember we were talking about all emergencies are starting and at the local level. Local government is the first level. Then if locals can't need more assistance, it gets pushed up to the operational area. Then it gets pushed up to the region, and then it essentially gets pushed up to the state. Now, with emergency declarations, there are different kinds of emergency declarations. There's a local emergency declaration, there's a state, and there's a federal. Now, the governor proclaims an emergency for a state declaration. The governor can proclaim an emergency, usually from the request of a local government, and that activates the State Operations Center, and it can activate the California Disaster Assistance Act. The CCDEH funds can be opened. And some of the examples that we have are earthquakes, fires, COVID-19, dam failures, which we had a couple years ago, oil spills, we have one going on now, and the drought. And like Jason talked about the drought is a different type of emergency. It really is a slow-moving, long-lasting emergency, which is different than an earthquake, which has more acute significance. There's also the local health officer can order a declaration from Safety Code 101040, and essentially, when we look at wildfires, when we look at phase 1, which is the household hazardous waste removals, the local health officer has to declare an emergency, has to have a local health declaration to allow DTSC or US EPA to go onto property and remove that household hazardous waste. that local health officer declaration is key in wildfire recovery for phase one. Now, primary CalEPA and BDO response activities. What do we really do and what do we really don't do? And when you look at some of our names, you think, hey, they do that, but here's what we actually do. So the Air Board. So the Air Board does 2.5 air monitoring in coordination with other agencies, like the local air districts and U.S. Forest Service. It works with California Air Response Planning Committee, the Alliance on Messaging, and it shares air monitoring data with many agencies. Currently, with all the wildfires going on in 2021, I think they still do have around approximately 34 portable air monitors out throughout the state, looking at the different air quality from the fires for us. Now, what the Air Board does not do, they don't do the CBRN, the chemical, biological, radiation, nuclear, or explosive air monitoring. Or they don't do air monitoring within the hot zone. Typically, those are going to be done by the actual hazardous material response teams that are going to be out there. They don't typically deal with that much with short-term incidents, and they do not, and this is a big point, they do not have an emergency duty officer, someone on call. DTSC, Department of Toxic Substance Control. They provide local support to local law enforcement agencies for removal of hazardous substances from illegal drug labs, releases or threatened releases from hazardous substances. They do have emergency response staff and contractor support during state and federally declared disasters. And essentially, this is where the wildfires phase one comes in. They provide hazmat technician trained staff for assessment and response during state and federally declared disasters, again, as in household hazardous waste removal. They do have a 24-hour-a-day emergency response duty officer on call. What they don't do is respond to biohazard incidents. Again, that's going to be your hazmat emergency response team. They don't fund removal of radioactive waste. They have staff and contractors. They don't have staff and contractors that are first responders. Again, they are not first responders. They are, again, your first responders are going to be your hazmat incident response team. They don't do response to release or threatened releases of hazardous substances on federally owned land. They don't respond to releases of waste oil, petroleum fuels, or spills. And on this one, I got to tell you, as an emergency responder for hazmat emergencies for a while in my time, we were always trying to find creative ways of not trying to get DTSC to come out on responses, even though we were dealing with waste oil or petroleum fuel. We're trying to find creative ways of not calling them waste oil, not calling them petroleum fuel, to kind of help them come out and help us with the site. And they also do not fund the cleanup of hazardous substances on state highways. That's going to be Caltrans. Now, DTSC does have a field data collection system, and this is kind of where this is a very new. These are the newer system that they have developed for phase one for wildfire recovery. DTSC's Office of Environmental Information Management has developed a data collection app for disaster-related activities for ER staff. The data is synced with local requesting agencies, OES, and CalRecycle, giving them a clear picture on the status of response. And it creates a dashboard that's made public for people to understand to show what has happened. And this is an example of one of their public dashboards. As you can see here, this is one from one of the fires, and it will show you the parcels that they assessed and they cleaned the day before, and they'll do total parcels to date. And they also give the GIS map so people can actually see where the parcels have been done. So let's go to DPR, Department of Pesticide Regulation. They provide technical support and oversight to county agricultural commissioners, inspections, investigations, sampling, and cease and desist orders. They coordinate with US EPA Region 9 on pesticide-related issues and incidents. They develop characterization and exposure assessment documents, and they maintain and provide environmental and ecological data on registered pesticides, including inventories of air, ground, and surface water monitoring data. What they don't have is they don't have staff or contractors that are pesticide hazmat first responders. They don't maintain a 24-hour emergency response duty officer, and they do not fund or remove or fund removal of pesticide wastes. Now, California Department of Recycling and Recovery. Now, they called this California Department of Resource Recycling and Recovery is called CalRecycle. And the reason it's called CalRecycle is because when you abbreviate it out, it is DRRR, and they don't want to be referred to as DER. So they came up, instead of DER, they came up with CalRecycle. So they provide technical assistance to local enforcement agencies, the LEAs. They facilitate and review emergency waivers and standards of issues by LEAs for landfill operators following a proclamation of emergency or declaration of disaster. They evaluate or disaster-related impacts of solid waste facilities. They provide guidance assistance to local jurisdictions in the development of debris management plans, and they assist the county to determine its community debris cleanup goals. And here's the biggest thing I want to get to on CalRecycle. They do not maintain a 24-hour emergency response duty officer. And here's the big thing that a lot of people don't understand. They do not have a mandated coordinated disaster debris removal program. Okay, a lot of people, when we talk about CalRecycle, we talk about phase 2 of wildfire recovery, and that is debris removal. A lot of people think that CalRecycle has a mandated program, and they do not. That only happens if the coordinated disaster debris removal program only happens if the governor declares a state of emergency and authorizes state agencies to assist with debris removal. Now, we've seen some in the last 5 years, we've seen where CalRecycle has been mission tasked to do phase 2 debris removal for fire recovery on certain fires, and we've seen where they have not been authorized. But again, we have to be sure that you understand that CalRecycle does not have a mandated coordinated disaster debris removal program, and it is only if the governor declares state of emergency and authorizes the agency to assist. Now, OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment. This is a great office. They provide toxicologists and research scientists and subject matter experts. They assess health effects and characterizes risk. They provide technical information, risk assessment, and public health recommendations. They assist in decision-making in sheltering in place evacuations. They determine health and environmental impacts of chemicals. They review sampling and data and provide recommendations. And they provide seafood safety assessment relating to oil spills and high levels of toxic substance. Currently, with the oil spill down in Orange County, OEHA has people on essentially working with OSPR, Fish and Wildlife OSPR, to look at for closure of fisheries, and they also have staff there reviewing sampling water and sampling data. What they don't have laboratory services. They do not provide certifications of clean, safe, or free of health concerns. A lot of people ask OEHA for a certification. Hey, can you certify this is clean? Can you certify this is safe? They don't offer certifications. They offer recommendations on levels. They don't have enforcement activities. They don't perform cleanup activities, and they do not have an emergency response duty officer. Now, the State Water Resource Control Board has a couple different divisions within them. Now, one of the divisions they have is Division of Drinking Water. Now, about 6 or 7 years ago, the Division of Drinking Water used to be in the CDPH, the Public Health Department of Public Health. That was switched over to the California Water Board. So the Division of Drinking Water, anything dealing with drinking water, actually is not under public health anymore. It's actually under State Water Resource Control Board. And the drinking water is responsible for ensuring safe drinking water, determines levels and precautions, including do not use and boil water notices, coordinates with local and public environmental health and water districts, and has about 20 offices staffed in statewide. They also have 9 regional water quality control boards that ensures appropriate management of wastewater. Now, the State Water Resource Control Board, the regional boards, again, there's 9 under the State Water Control Board. What the Water Board does not have, they don't have jurisdiction over the state water project, and they do not prevent water and respond to water and floods and catastrophic events. So, as far as the debris the mission, when wildfires happen, the mission is to protect public health and safety in the environment from impact of ash, debris, and hazardous waste from burned home sites following the wildland fire. And again, this goes back to what we talked about phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 being the household hazardous waste removal done by US EPA and by DTSC. and phase 2, the debris removal by CalRecycle. Here are some of the local ones that we had, some of the local disasters that the recent disasters that we had, 4610 and declared, and 4619. And you can see some of the counties that have been affected by those ones. Our current mission assignments from CalEPA is that we are activated to the State Operations Center for COVID-19 and for the wildfires, for the state wildfires. We have currently, like I said earlier, we have air monitors deployed throughout the state. I think there's about 34 right now. We have the water board supporting and doing support and technical assistance for drought needs. And the Department of DTSC has all of those areas that they're doing debris, household hazardous waste removal. And CalRecycle has been mission tasked for those for debris removal as well. Now, as we go to wrap up, when you look at these pictures show total devastation. And that's our world currently. That's California, and that's our world. And I know some of you have experienced them, some of you haven't experienced yet. But I go back to what I said earlier. This is our jobs. This is the people in these the pictures here are having the worst days of their life. Their homes have been destroyed. Their lives have been affected. And it's our job to help them get back. People will laugh when I say this, but essentially we're the government and we're here to help. And I'm not joking. That is what we're here to do. We are here to bring people back to a pre-event status. Now, as far as takeaways, again, bad things happen. This is California. They've happened in the past. We're having a particularly bad couple of years, and it's not going to get better anytime soon. So when you look at disasters, they used to be low frequency, but now they're high frequency and have high consequence events. California is a disaster-prone state. We have CalEPA and its BDOs have an increasing role in emergency management. If the governor or a designee tasks CalEPA or the BDOs for something, we have to comply. CalEPA and the BDOs are part of a large team of local, federal, and nonprofit and private entities. We provide effective emergency management and takes an investment in the 4 S's, which is stuff, staff, space, and systems. And no matter how much communication and coordination is going on, it is never enough. And I can honestly tell you, again, after about 2 decades of emergency response, every time you go into an after-action report or you go into a hot wash about what happened and what can be done better, communication is always the first thing in every instant. Is said, hey, we can have better communication. We can have better communication. And things like this, information and training like this, what we're having right now, where you understand what the capabilities of other agencies are and the communication pathways and the communication flow, this is what helps that communication during their response. Training, if you haven't done any kind of training, we should be doing tabletops. There should be different kinds of plans set out. And you should understand the capabilities and capacities that must be maintained. And effective emergency management improves day-to-day operations. Here is some of our ERMAC resources. Here's our people that you can contact from CalEPA, ARB, DPR, CalRecycle, DTSC, and the Water Board. And thank you for that. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to toss it over to Bill, Greg Baisley, and Bill Jones from US EPA.
Thank you so much, John. I am pulling my screen up now, so please bear with me for a second.
Hey, can you hear me okay? I had a Bluetooth debacle, so lesson learned at an ICP, bring an extra set of Bluetooth headphones.
You sound great, Bill. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I also wanted to point out that I know we're being recorded, but John Elkins and Jason have never looked sharper, and I think Greg and I look decidedly underdressed.
So up to you to switch still the screen view, Greg.
Yep, give me 1 second.
Beautiful.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me on the tech side. So I even got the background up. I'm Greg Baisley with US EPA. I'm in the Emergency Planning and Preparedness Division in Superfund. I'm here with Bill Jones. We'll be co-presenting, kind of switching back and forth on a couple slides here. Today, we're going to talk about an overview of our program. I want to let you guys know capabilities that we have to assist both state and local partners in the event of a release or an emergency situation. And then we're going to highlight some of the recent work that's been done this year in the 2021 California wildfire response, as well as the past years. And then it wouldn't be this era if we didn't talk about COVID and the challenges that we're continuing to face under the current conditions. There's been a couple of breakthrough cases, even with vaccinated folks. So we're continuing to stay diligent and really keep our workforce safe as we respond to incidents. So here are our pictures. Bill and I, we are on the planning and preparedness side. The other side of the house is our emergency responders. They're the on-scene coordinators. We have about 15 of those. Bill and I do a lot of the exercises, coordination with LEPCs and CERCs and RRT work, regional response team, which we'll talk about a little later. All right, so I'm going to provide these slides to Cheryl and Tim, and I'm going to go through these background slides a little quick. They're kind of the authority. I don't want to put you guys to sleep, but I think it is important to have for reference. So we're operating under the National Contingency Plan, the NCP. Like many other environmental rules, this came as a result of a massive oil spill in the UK. And what it did, it provided a comprehensive system or framework for spill reporting and response. This designates OSCs as the lead of the incident, as the federal lead for hazardous substance releases or oil spills. We'll get into this a little more later, but if it's in the coastal region, that's a Coast Guard. If it's inland, then it's US EPA. So in order to respond, in order to plan and prepare and perform enforcement, the authorities under the NCP are from both the Clean Water Act. So if something goes to water, that's where the authority comes from. More airborne substances or volatiles are under CERCLA, also known as Superfund. We do talk about a little some of the situations that we respond to. The NCP is the framework which includes releases that are chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. So that CBRN environment. These are both accidental and intentional releases, meaning we respond to terrorist events as well. Here's the little 1990s kind of sandwich module. So if you look on the right in the planning group, we really try to incorporate everything from industry, local responders, state responders to the national response team. So here's the structure. In some of the exercises that we do, we try to match up the industry plans for an emergency response with the local response plans and make sure they mesh and those lines of communication are there and in place. So the national response team, it's comprised of 15 federal agencies, EPA being one of them. EPA is a chair on that. It provides policy advice and national level assistance to OSCs and the RRT during a large-scale response. So our RRTs broken out very similar to our regional structure. So California is included in Region 9, and I believe there was some activity of the RRT with a recent oil spill in Orange County, and we're currently activating and practicing that coordination there. As John mentioned in his presentation, we fall under ESF 10 in the National Response Framework. So we're responsible for responding to oil and hazardous materials. So that kind of gets through the background slide. So a little bit about US EPA's structure. Our regional office is up in San Francisco, and we also have a warehouse there that houses our response equipment, our trucks, our air monitoring equipment, anything that we would need to respond to an event. We also have an office in Southern California where I'm based. It's in Long Beach, Signal Hill area. We have one on-scene coordinator stationed in Nevada to be closer to anything that could occur there. And then we also have in Las Vegas the environmental response team, which are kind of our experts that serve as support. So if there's any, they can support us with equipment, with people that specialize in specific chemicals, things like that. So our mission is to protect human health and safeguard the environment. So the type of responses, emergencies, time critical removal actions, non-time critical removal actions, and disaster response. So these all depend on the extent and the type of contamination that could occur and the threat in the time frame related to that with human health and the environment. So here are some numbers that are really important for local health departments or anyone to know if they do need our assistance. And in a moment, I'll give some examples of ways that we, in situations in which we can provide assistance. So our EPA Region 9 duty line is staffed 24/7, and that's a direct line to an on-scene coordinator that's on call. So similar to I believe it's CalOES. We have someone manning the phones at all times. The second number on there is the NRC number. If that is called under CERCLA, that's industry's responsibility to make that report. But if that's called, it activates the national response system, and that call will then directly come into one of our OSCs through the phone system. And then the last number up there is the EPCRA RMP and Oil Information Center, known as the call center. So I always like to put this up there. It's staffed by contractors, and they'll answer any question that you have related to any of those statutes. So this is more in the, it's not a spill notification. It's more pre-planning questions or any questions you could have with any environmental laws. So here I'm going to go into some slides giving examples of what we can help with if it exceeds the local or state level. So oil spills. One's Bill's sitting down in Orange County with a current oil spill that made national news down there. We've had a number of them in California over in the past. Here's Pyramid Lake oil spill in Gorman. Again, we handle anything that's inland, but we closely coordinate with U.S. Coast Guard who handles anything that's offshore. So hazmat cleanups. These can be drum sites, any abandoned drums, pressurized gas cylinders. This is in Huntington Park, California. You can see there the tanks are degraded and could potentially have a release to the environment. Radiation sites. We do have at ERT, there are some radiation experts, and we have some in-house as well. Here's a site in North Hollywood. Mad chemist sites. So these are, you open up a garage door and you've got a garage full of unmarked, unlabeled chemicals. I went out to one, I believe it was 2 years ago in the Long Beach area. It was a retired chemist that just had a hobby of collecting chemicals. And it led to a pretty hazardous situation in the garage. And this is in a community that's pretty dense packed, neighbors just feet away. So those are some of the scarier sites that I've seen in my career. We can assist with lead cleanup. So removal of lead contaminated soil, obviously with children's health, lead issues in homes, we can do that as well. This is a top priority for some of our OSCs. And then one that's not on here before I turn it over to Bill is just general air monitoring. We've been expanding our ability with air monitoring. There was a site up in Ontario that made the news as well, where there was an illegal firework manufacturer. There were a couple fatalities there. And then there were so many fireworks, bomb squad had to do a controlled burn. And we set up air monitoring equipment to ensure that the local communities weren't affected, and that when we were doing that controlled burn, no metals, no other pollutants were getting off-site outside of the evacuation zone and affecting the surrounding community. Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, again, let me know if you can't hear me. My apologies. You always learn something during the response, and mine is bring a headset that plugs in case your Bluetooth fails. Generally not an easy place to find. Good, excellent. Yeah, it's hard to find quiet places here. I want to touch on the oil spill, maybe call an audible from our slides briefly, and then we'll get into the federally declared disasters. So as Greg mentioned, for hazmat and oil, we coordinate closely with the Coast Guard on those incidents that aren't under a FEMA presidentially federally declared disaster. So in this case, the oil spill down here, it's in the area of responsibility for the Coast Guard, but we are a cooperating agency and work closely with them. And so our role can vary in that instance. And then there's a line of demarcation. If it goes inland, like in the case, if you remember, the Refugio oil spill was very complicated because it started in kind of EPA area of responsibility and then moved into the coasts, into the Coast Guard responsibility. So in this case, it's something new that I wanted to mention that got formed up is a public health assessment unit. Usually the air monitoring and water monitoring are under environmental unit or under a MAC, a multi-agency cooperative group. In this case, we formed a public health assessment unit, which is great because it has its own visibility separate from the environmental units dealing with SCAD and picking up tar balls and skimming and other things. So we are able to get the air monitoring and the water monitoring under that. We're doing it with South Coast Air Quality Management District, Public Health and Environmental Health from Orange County, with water boards and others. So it's a great group, and it's the first time that I've been involved and my colleagues have been involved where we form that unit. So that might be something for the future where we work closely with you on these type of oil spills. So now I'll move into the federally declared disasters. Greg, I guess, do you mind operating the slides? Thanks. So this kind of mirrors what John Elkins was saying. At the federal level, we have emergency support function coordinators. The slide that Greg showed all the different agencies engaged. We're hazmat and oil. And so we typically get involved year-round with our counterparts on through the regional interagency steering committee. So we do tabletops, we do training, we stay in touch so that when we're in the stressful environment of a response, we're ready to go and know each other and kind of know faces and names and how people communicate. As John indicated, that communication is really critical. We typically deploy to the SOC, the State Operations Center, or the FEMA's are the RRCC. They have their own acronym, but it's essentially their Emergency Operations Center. They have one in Oakland in our case. Is that my tip to move forward? So I'll move faster. Sorry, Greg.
No, sorry. You mentioned the SOC, and I thought that was my indication to go to the.
Oh, no, it's just a couple more here real quick. Cool. So then just Greg and I also do work with CERCs, Turks, and LEPCs, so the State Emergency Response Commissions, local emergency planning commissions, which you guys are intimately familiar with. We do training and updates and talks and bring in kind of speakers from our areas of expertise from our folks. So, in the past, like PFAS and other key issues that pop up, we can bring scientists from our group in to talk to folks. We also coordinate. I'm the coordinator for the regional response team and the Oceania regional response team. You saw the slide from Greg. My counterpart is from the Coast Guard. And we developed regional area contingency plans, which are being put in place, for example, during this spill, and kind of map out what needs to happen when we have an incident. So at least we have a playbook that obviously things evolve on the fly, but at least we have an initial playbook. We also do training through safety days, chemical safety days, if you guys have been there, with closely working with Ammonia Safety Training Institute. We do Cameo training, which is an online software suite, which is great. If you haven't used it, it's a really useful tool, and a lot of first responders use it to kind of map out a bunch of different things in terms of the kind of where the chemicals are, what the hazards are, and there's some layers that you can put some modeling, like the Aloha model, where you can do a quick and dirty, where's the plume potentially going to go, so you can set up incident command posts in the right spot, and also look at potential evacuation areas. And then we've done tribal workshops. John mentioned that incident command system, ICS. We can provide training on that in different levels. We also have first responder awareness and first responder operations. First responder awareness is a good one for a wide range of folks, just to get a feel for, if something happens, who do I call and how do I deal with it? So we don't get in any issues until the first responders or others arrive. And then Greg is our training and exercise coordinator overall, and we do virtual and in-person training and exercises. We did a virtual exercise with Guam recently that Greg led on a chlorine release, and then also potentially functional and full exercises. All right, that was a mouthful. Greg, I'll try to speed up. Next slide. This is a picture of the sock. I think I see Greg's photo there sitting next to Jason Boetzer in the second row, maybe. No. It's a lot of people in the space, but if you haven't been there, it's a beautiful space. It's almost like a cathedral in terms of the ceiling height and the workspace and the way it's designed. And so we often, as I indicated, first get deployed there. Our roles are committing agency assets, approving and implementing the mission assignments. So FEMA is the general contractor, and they hire us and other people to do different types of work, but also maintaining situational awareness. So we've obviously been tracking the fires. We did it last year, even before we get a mission assignment, just to be able to get our assets ready to go in case there's a mission assignment, so we can move relatively quickly. And then sometimes we'll serve as a technical expert on some kind of thorny or key issues, like Greg mentioned, kind of radiation and some other kind of funky chemical issues that might pop up. We'll get called in. Next slide. So fires. I know took a quick look at the attendees. I know Marilyn Underwood's on there, and Heather's and others. So, we work closely with environmental health directors from the beginning of a response, and we want to talk a little bit on that and touch on some of the other aspects. So next slide. So preparing for deployment, as indicated, we maintain situational awareness, and we kind of plan for what resources we're going to need, how kind of approximate kind of where we might want to put staging areas, what kind of equipment we'll need, what kind of unique safety issues there are. And obviously in a fire, trees are a big hazard. Falling trees, we've had to deal with COVID, especially last year. It was at its height when we were heading out into the field. A lot of unknowns with respect to that when we were heading out. And kind of overall, kind of just looking at the scope and scale of what we might be walking into. And in operations, kind of they start training their folks. Greg will touch on some of the unique tools that we have, and we train them up so that they're ready to go. Next slide. So typically, I think John mentioned this, but there's phase 1 and phase 2. We only do phase 1, which is the survey, removal, and disposal of household hazardous waste at affected properties. Typically, that's kind of cleanup on aisle 7. It's usually like paint cans, nothing fancy, cylinders, but we can really get into some tricky things sometimes. And I think, as Marilyn will attest, at Last Chance Road in Santa Cruz County during the CZU fire, I think we removed 150,000 pounds of lead acid batteries, which were quite a lift, no pun intended, to get out of there. It's a pretty heavy load. We had to get out kind of unique little side-by-side vehicles to get up there. The terrain was so difficult. And then sometimes, like in Coffee, during the or in like the Paradise Fire, you'll have a neighborhood where houses are side-by-side, and we can roll through pretty quick. So it always varies in terms of kind of the unique terrain and nature of what we're dealing with. And then once we do kind of our work, and again, CalEPA calls us in, and we work closely with DTSC on kind of those counties. We usually divvy up the workload, and then all our info goes into phase 2, which is the bigger debris removal. Next slide. So we operate a little differently than DTSC because of our federal nature. We need a governor executive order to allow us access to properties. And the important thing here is because of the public health endangerment and threat due to the hazardous nature of those properties before we go through and clear them, there is a very close link to environmental health directors in each of the counties once we get this executive order, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But that's what gives us the roadmap to go in to be able to do the work. Next slide. And we set up staging areas. This was Santa Cruz is a huge staging area because we actually use the staging area for stuff for many counties. We had little satellite staging areas, brought it into the big staging area, and that was about 4 or 5 acres. Because we wanted to spread out because of COVID, and we wanted to, segregate the materials that we were collecting and the like. Next slide. We also have to usually get a US DOT hazmat transfer emergency waiver. Basically, just allows us to take our stuff on the road to where it needs to go. Next slide. Oh, Greg put in this one. This is for this year. We have mission assignments covering Plumas County and El Dorado County for the Dixie Fire and the Calder Fire. Next slide. Oh, did you take out the counties from last year, Greg?
I did. I modernized the slides.
Okay, well, if you could just, so I want to touch on that because I think we worked more extensively with them last year in some ways, but it's kind of the same this year. So typically what we do, we get a mission, and then you can go to the next slide, that's fine. So we'll do a windshield assessment of the damaged area. And before we go out into the field, we'll call the environmental health director typically and say, hey, we got this mission assignment. We're going to be starting up. This is what we do. Some counties have seen us before, sadly, in previous years. Like Butte County seems to get fires or some kind of disaster every year lately. Some counties, it's their first time through. So, for example, last year with San Mateo and Santa Cruz, I think that was your guys' first in Monterey for those fires, and Santa Clara as well. But like I said, Butte County and even parts of Plumas, they've dealt with fires over the years off and on. So we'll contact you guys and say, this is what our plan is. We go take a look at the lay of the land. Usually we'll drop by the Emergency Operations Center and say, hey, we're going to be driving around. They let us know where, what makes the most sense in terms of a roadmap. And we also coordinate with the local sheriff to make sure that they're aware of what we do and that we're going to be in town. And if we find rocket propelled grenade launchers, which we found last year, or if we find large caliber ammunition, who to call, and if we need to bring in the bomb squad. We also get from the local folks, we get animal control phone numbers. We get, if there's down power lines, the local PG&E or utility number, kind of those type of things. So we get a quick guide for our ops in the field. We coordinate with you guys in terms of messaging, in terms of what we do, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about how that works in terms of some of that messaging. And a big one, I showed you the staging area. It's tough to get staging areas in a disaster because people like PG&E snap up the good spots early, quite frankly. And so we work closely with public works in a county. And so the environmental health directors, I know Maryland really helped us connect in with them in terms of looking for a staging area for Santa Cruz, and they were instrumental in helping us get one quickly. Because the quicker we can get that set up, the quicker we can get to work. Because as we say, you can't pick stuff up until you have a place to put it down. Next slide. So I think, Greg, are you going to go through a little on the collector apps?
Yeah, sure. All right, so to give you a little bit of feel for our field ops, our teams utilize something called the collector app, and the state does the same. But it's basically an application where we can document the site activity. So I'll talk about recon in a second, but when we're actually on site, if we're removing any HHW, we record that. Our standard operating procedures are there for consistency. One of the things is parcel information. I think we have a slide on that coming up, but confirming that it matches up with the DINS number in the information that we get from the county is pretty important when we're collecting the data. And I think Bill mentioned this earlier.
The DINS number.
Sorry.
People might not know that acronym.
Oh, the damage inspection. So CAL FIRE goes through and says, you have a residential property damaged. So that's the initial data that we get to let us know what our universe is for what we have to clean up. So a big part of this project is really the data management. And I think Bill mentioned this earlier, but later on in the process of phase 2, we hand off data packages to our partners and whoever's going to be coming in behind us and cleaning up the ash pile. Did I miss anything on that one, Bill? Anything to add?
No, I mean, the one thing that I would say is that's, sorry, I turned my video off, is that the critical thing is that linkage between the DINS mapping and the local data from that we get from the counties. And again, environmental health helps us with that and helps us get the GIS data layers from the county to link in with their GIS people is critical. But there's a lot of work that has to be done on that parcel shifting. Just as an example, I think there's 30% parcel shifting in Santa Cruz County with the data, and then also up in Plumas. So there's a lot of work. And if you don't do the pre-work on the data and make sure it's QA QC'd on those layers, it'll bite you at the back end. So we do make sure that we have a big data team and get that established early on.
Here's another shot from collector. So the phase 1, again, removing the household hazardous waste. You can see the parcels on our dashboard, which I'll show you in a minute. They're marked phase 1 complete. It's not only for our data tracking, but it's also for the public to see and to watch the progress of their property as it becomes complete, and we get them closer, as John mentioned, to getting back to pre-disaster. I'm going to move ahead a little bit. I still have 20 slides and I want to leave time for questions, but here's another screenshot of the status of parcels. So here's the collector overview. A lot of the times there's different layers, and we'll bring in specific layers with our drone teams, which I'll show in a second. But in previous years, these have been updated every 15 minutes. This year, we did some QA QC to make sure that the public's seeing the correct data. So we would update that every evening around 10:30 p.m. So you'd have real data the next day. So I'm going to move through some of these for time's sake. Again, so this year for recon, we've been utilizing drones. So say you have, we're in mostly forest areas, and say there's a road blocked. We can access more ground and get our eyes on things to know if there's a property there, how much HHW it's going to have. So in the planning process, we can be more efficient in cleaning up this household hazardous waste. All right, so here's our story map. This year, we put up our own story map, which tells the public kind of what we're doing. We give examples of what HHW is. It's kind of small on my screen there, but we separate it by the counties. And in the lower right, you can see our progress matrix is the donut, as we call it. It gets greener and greener as we proceed and complete the properties. But that also has an interactive map where you can type in your address, see the status of your property, and we put that up every year. It helps tell the story of what we're doing and also track progress from anywhere from FEMA to our own internal management. And we also fed our data to DTSC this year. When someone's wondering in a specific county whether their house is cleaned up, whether they're moving towards progress. They don't care if it was US EPA or the state that did it. They just want to know that it's done. So we fed it to DTSC. So there's one central place for data in coordination with the feds and the state.
Yeah, and that just, Greg, real quick, that this year was unique in some ways relatively because we worked with DTSC in the same counties. Last year we hadn't. Typically we'll just divvy up the workload, so we'll have our own kind of county that we work with. So it makes it a lot simpler in terms of communication and the go-between and kind of overall in terms of how we work it. And one quick thing on that is we really rely on the county liaisons. I didn't mention this, but we usually have county liaisons with our teams in the field. They know the areas, they know the people, and they can also help coordinate if there's a parcel that's been missed or an inaccessible parcel to help us work that so we can get those parcels cleaned up. So it's really critical because they get a lot of the calls from the public, and then they in turn can give us that information to feed in to make sure that we don't miss anybody. Sorry.
Yeah, and interactions with the property owners, if they're in the local area, liaisons have been great in facilitating that. The next couple pictures are just photos of our work in action. We have protocol where we look at safety considerations before we go on site. There's 4 gas monitors. There's radiation detection. As you can imagine, stepping through holes, whether it's a septic tank or if it's a bunker, we ran into a lot of bunkers in the remote areas. So our folks are suited up and making entry onto the burned property. Here's another picture of that. They're walking on the ash pile. You can see the gentleman or lady has the poker stick, literally poking where their next step will be to make sure that they're not going to fall through the ash pile. He also has some radiation detection equipment in hand. Let's see, I'll go through this real quick. I think one thing to note is that bottom middle picture, we do have SOPs for marking both trees, as Bill mentioned. I don't know if I have a picture of that in here, but that's really important because fire-affected trees, we have arborists that go in before we even get on site and mark them if they're hazardous, if they're highly likely to fall, or if there's a branch that's of danger. But what you see there is a cylinder marked with an orange X, meaning that's been degassed, and it's left there for phase 2 to pick up with scrap metal. So it's no longer a hazard, as indicated with the orange X, and there's nothing inside of it that's hazardous, and phase 2 can pick it up. Bill mentioned the large number of lead acid batteries. So when you get folks that are living off the grid and they want electricity, they have large lead acid battery banks. In the small picture in the bottom left, you can see one of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, Greg, one thing too, we give every county a full data layer at the end when we're finished with phase 1. We give it to the state and the county. Not only helps phase 2, it has like the information on all the tree hazards. We take an arborist with us on our recon teams, and those trees are marked, so that's useful. And it's got other useful information, not only for phase 2, but for the counties longer term, hopefully.
So quickly moving through examples of household hazardous waste. So car batteries, sometimes we remove those. Ammunition, compressed gas cylinders. There you bottom right, second to the right, you see UXOs, larger than 50 caliber ammunition. We call in the bomb squad, and we don't handle that. And then the bottom right, you see an example. I think that's a pesticide. Something that we would pick up if it's not fully destroyed by the fire. Then we also, in our collector app and on the dashboard, it is marked complete when we've completed our phase 1 work, but we also mark it with a physical sign at the location, just saying that the property has been complete.
Yeah, and on those, we coordinate with the county to put whatever county phone number or website, whatever you want, because we leave town and we don't want to leave people hanging. So we work with, they're going to contact the county. So we make sure that we have your information that you want on there in case they have further questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Like I said in the beginning, it wouldn't be this era if we didn't talk about COVID. We're staying vigilant. I'm going to breeze through this fairly quickly because I know people hear this on a daily basis. But in 2020, we were operating at the height of the pandemic. And even now, we are still seeing breakthrough cases with individuals that are vaccinated. But we do have a reduced field footprint. Anyone that can operate virtual. So our finance is probably the easiest example of that. They're not on site in an incident command post. They're working virtually. We have COVID safety plan. We have testing protocol, and I'll talk about that in a second. Everyone's familiar with these. We do require masks for our workers, disinfection and sanitation, and then we really do have a strict policy. If our contractors or our personnel aren't abiding by that, they really do get sent home. And luckily, we haven't had that. Everybody's complying with it. One of the things that I think is a little unique that really helped us from getting any outbreaks is our pod system. So our HHW collection teams, they don't intermix or work with anybody. When they drop off their HHW at the end of the day, there's no contact at the staging area, and they stick with their team. There's no intermixing or changing, and that has been a huge success in our responses. This is from last year, but anytime that we can meet outside, we made sure we did that. We did 2 types of COVID testing. One was a screening, so it was an app asking the basic questions. Do you have a fever? Have you been experiencing any symptoms? And then we did PCR testing. So saliva samples, pretty cool little way to do it. You submit a saliva sample, twist on a cap that has a reagent, then you mail it in. We've recently moved to rapid testing to get quicker results. The saliva samples were taking 48 hours to get results back, but we were testing upon pre-deployment twice a week when folks are in the field, and then demo before people leave site, and then when they get home. And we've covered this, but we've reduced our footprint as much as possible. So in the field, you have the IC, you have the ops folks that are actually doing the work, safety officer, and then there's a couple hybrids that need to be in the field for different reasons. As Bill mentioned, the liaison. Oftentimes, it's important to make those connections with the counties, and doing that in person sometimes is best. So UAOs, I touched on this, but it's really our recon team, and it's advanced technology that we're utilizing more and more to just see what's out there and also keep our field team safe. One thing I wanted to squeeze in was that we're still leaning forward for this fire season. We have at least a month left, if not more. I don't even know what day it is anymore, but I know there's still a good amount of fire season left. So, we have some equipment staged. If there is a federally declared disaster that we need to help on, we're ready to do that. Every year we do a hot wash where we learn from the experiences of the current year. And then we have a great relationship with the state. Both Jason and John, we talk on a consistent basis and coordinate on a number of things. So that's an ongoing thing between the federal and state partnership. And I think that is all I have. We're leaving a little under 20 minutes for questions, but that is Bill and my contact phone number, so you have it. Again, I will send these slides to Cheryl and Tim. Went through them kind of fast, but thank you so much for having us. Appreciate the time, and if it's the time for questions, we could take those now.
Fantastic. Thank you. You can stop sharing your screen now. That was great presentations. And Jason and Greg, if you can come back on screen. I definitely have some questions for you guys. Awesome job. One of the questions that came up in the Q&A that I wanted to touch on, because my experience was 15 years working in Butte County, as you mentioned, Bill, all the difficulties we had in Butte County. And just with some of the smaller fires, we had issues with our health officer being willing to declare it a public health emergency. And, we made the case, that there's been a lot of assessments done of the debris by other counties that shows that it's a hazardous waste and it is a public health emergency, but we could not get past his own unwillingness, really, in one smaller fire, to make that declaration. So there was talk. I know Justin was exploring this for a while. The idea of legislation to kind of have it pre-declared, essentially, if there's a wildland fire, that the waste meets the criteria of that 10104. I think that's the right code section. As a definition for hazardous waste, and it is a public health emergency, and it would trigger all of the things that would follow. So, any awareness of any efforts along those lines to make that process more streamlined?
I can speak first on that question, Tim. And I know through CDPH and CCLHO, they're currently updating and developing their own internal debris management tool specific to wildfires for local health officers. So I know that's one effort. And I say that because once that is completed and updated, that awareness and coordination from a local health officer standpoint at the local level is critical, will help, I would assume and hope that would help in that declaration. As far as any statutory changes and including wildfire debris, I have not heard of any traction of adding that to the statute specifically, because, well, one, I haven't heard of it, and if anybody can, if that is moving forward, we'd like to be able to be aware of that. Two, looking at it, there is, once you start adding things, then it may take away a little bit of discretion from the local health officer. So there's always that give and take of that perspective. But from our standpoint, and I think looking at some of the studies that have been done recently, from OEHA and others and CalRecycle on the ash, is we can, look at that data, share that with all of you and the health officers that further, document that the ash itself and it, exhibits hazardous characteristics that in part will, if not cleaned up, it will, have impacts on public health and the environment. So, and I say that too, because at the state level, we recognize it in how we can best coordinate with all of you and the local health officers in that declaration and support that. Let us know and what we can do. But even, Lake County, for instance, DTSC was mission tasked for phase 1 without even the cache fire being declared a state declaration this year. Reason being high density of mobile homes and next to Cache Creek, which serves as a drinking water source, and also there was a couple junkyards, and I think Craig is on this presentation this morning. I know probably resources weren't deployed as quickly as he would like. But, one of the things we're working at the state level is where we have a bigger pot of money for DTSC to support locals on these phase 1 aspects. So in this case, it ended up being declared a state DEC, and DTSC will, get reimbursement. But every time there's a declaration or every time there's a mission task, DTSC has to go to Department of Finance and get approval for the phase 1 activities. So there's a step in there. And so with all response and recoveries, and I know this goes even to mutual aid, finance and monies drive a lot of it. And so I say all that because that was a unique one where DTSC went out because of those public health and environmental sensitive receptors, performed the task, later was state declared and receive reimbursement. But initially those funds were out of their out of a special account. So
right. Okay, I think that is the key about getting that local public health declaration, is that triggers the CalOES resources and the reimbursement mechanism. So that is a real critical thing for counties to be aware of, that they've got to work through their local OES to get that declaration with their public health officer. Yeah, and then just real quick on that, the next thing is then the counties through their OES liaison and up through the region submitting a formal request to OES for both phase 1
and phase 2. So if you don't have examples of what those requests look like, let John and I know. And I know there's a lot of people that have made those requests to OES. Usually go to the director of OES for those activities.
Good. Cool. Okay. I've got some other questions coming here. Can you clarify for me, if you could, when the state oversees a cleanup versus when the feds oversee the cleanup? How do you guys decide who's going to take the lead?
Well, I can start off, and then Bill and Greg and John fill in. First there's a state declaration, right? And once there's that state declaration, CalOES mission tasks, as John E. mentioned, DTSC to perform that phase 1 activities. Depending on the number of incidents that are occurring at one single time, and state declarations, and the number of destroyed structures. And then the next part, a federal declaration has to be declared. Once that federal declaration is declared, that opens up US EPA resources and DTSC. And it was mentioned by Greg, Bill, and John. We're coordinating even before there's a Fed deck and DTSC's mission tasks. We're having internal coordination meetings, looking at our resources capabilities. And once DTSC gets to the point, it's like, we need US EPA assistance. We request their assistance. And in those counties where there's a Fed declaration, US EPA will come in and support. This year, since DTSC had initiated phase 1, in both the Dixie Fire in Plumas County and Calder Fire in El Dorado County, DTSC started that and was the lead at US EPA and joined those operations. But as last year mentioned, where DTSC did not start the phase 1 operations, and it was just, we had 25 operations going in 25 different counties last year, and above and beyond state capabilities. And so US EPA went in and was the lead in many of those counties last year where there was a federal declaration. Bill and Greg, fill in the missing.
Just only one other thing. I'm kind of laughing because there are some spots where it gets a little tricky, like if it's on federal land, Forest Service land, and things like that are still being worked out. But we talk, as Jason mentioned, they're probably sick of seeing us. We talk all the time in the off season to make sure, and also the data. John led a great data group to make sure that we're in sync. But I think overall, when we're out in the field, we get a sense of how burnt out DTSC is getting. They get pulled all over the state. We have limited number of places where we have to go. They're fast and we're slow. We're a slower tick. It takes us a little longer to get going, but then we can do like 15,000 or whatever, like it was at Paradise. So it's not necessarily scientific, but we kind of monitor it and work together. And then when there's a presidential deck, we actually come in. But that kind of plays into it because DTSC has to keep their energy also to do what's called milk runs for phase 2. I think maybe John mentioned that, but if there's a remnant structure or a parcel that we can't get to, then they come back and do that during phase 2, and they send out these kind of hotshot teams for the milk runs. So yeah, it's just kind of a matter of kind of staying in touch. And the other thing is sometimes we deal in our region with states that don't have a structure or an infrastructure like California. So in Arizona, Greg and a couple of other colleagues, they trained Arizona in how we do our collector apps and the stuff. And not only the state, but they trained a county. And so the county did a few parcels on their own just because they wanted to get them knocked out on phase 1, the HHW knocked out and get to phase 2. So there's a variety of options. Probably long-winded answer, but.
No, thanks. That's helpful.
I have to just real pause and just thank Bill and Greg because US EPA has been very nimble this year in being quick to integrate into our operations. So we always like to have a key word each season, and this year is nimble. So
bingo.
Nice. Nimble was its name. Oh, okay. Michael has a coordination question. He says, we had some unique challenges on our SCU fire last year in Santa Clara. Overall, I want to acknowledge the great work of CalEPA, the BDOs, and US EPA. We thank you. We found working closely with neighborhood groups, community organizations, and law enforcement helpful. have you used other strategies to communicate and encourage people to opt in to the government cleanup programs to avoid enforcement? I think you might just talk about a little bit too about government cleanup program versus private and just how that dynamic works, and maybe even right of entry a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, well, I can touch on at least from Santa Clara, and it was uniquely challenging. That area is about as remote as it gets, and we've dealt with people all over the place up in during the campfire where we had people shooting off guns as they're coming in. So it's not a, you know.
Welcome to Butte County.
Yeah, and DTSC, you know, up in Trinity. I mean, it's not. It's all over. There's all over. There are pockets where, you know, for what people like the privacy, whatever. We typically have never had any issues to any real degree like we had last year at Santa Clara in terms of that level and that scale of pushback from a large amount of the community. And we really worked closely with environmental health. It was really difficult and tedious, and we managed to get a lot of it done. But getting that access was exceedingly difficult. And we did work with the sheriff's office and others and local trusted folks to kind of, you know, hey, they're okay. It's okay for them to come in. They're only doing their job and they're going to leave. They're not enforcers. We don't do any regulatory work when we go there. You know, we're focused on one thing. But I think in the future, you know, like having the county liaisons critical. That really helps, as we mentioned. But, you know, you just kind of have to roll with whatever you encounter. People were saying we're going to have all kinds of problems in El Dorado County and last year in Fresno and some of those pockets. And it was great. People brought us donuts and, you know, EPA can enter, but no one else can, signs that they put up. So I think it just varies. You just got to have to roll with it.
Okay.
Yeah, Tim, real quick on that this year too, and thanks, Bill. This year up in Siskiyou County for the lava fire, we had with the situation with the illegal cannabis cultivation and where that fire went through. This year, Adam Palmer and his team, along with Rick Dean, held workshops. And they actually had ROEs for phase one, which we normally don't have ROEs for phase one. But because of the sensitivity, the lack of trust of that community with local leaders and just government in general. And so that was a success in having those community workshops, reaching out to community elders and explaining to them the purpose of the program, as Bill mentioned, to remove household hazardous waste and not, you know, what other operations are taking place on the property as far as agricultural activities that's not our concern. We're there to clean up the environment and protect public health. So that was a different approach with a different community up in Siskiyou County. So I just wanted to highlight that what happened there this year.
And that is something that we typically, as he said, don't do ROEs. Our counterparts in EPA up in Oregon last year did them for all the parcels. And it's operationally, as you know, when some of these parcels are really far afield, you can delay operations significantly and increase the cost significantly if you can't plan for how you're going to address those parcels in a sequential and logical manner. And if you're doing ROEs, it's piecemeal. So at least for phase one, we typically don't like to do those.
Yeah, I can tell you it's such a big local issue about the local control versus doing the big right thing more efficiently. And that's a big conversation that each county has when there is a local emergency. So I want all of our audience to be aware of that the county council gets involved, state attorneys can get involved sometimes with the right of entry form, and so it can be a big conversation. A couple more questions for you. I'm curious about when there's a large fire like the Camp Fire, part of the early days was the search for human remains. And so that certainly delays the assessment and phase one process. And, as well as people's just inherent desire to get back to their property and kind of search through their own waste debris and look for that family jewel, I guess, literally. I'm just wondering your experience with that, with both those situations. And are you guys just sort of sitting on the sidelines waiting for those things to pass before you get involved, or do you coordinate with law enforcement? And just how does that process work from each of your perspective? As far as timing, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple things. One is another example of a disaster I went into is the mudslides down in Montecito a few years back after the Thomas fire. And they had like 30 some odd deaths. And that was happening while we were down there. The sensitivity of being around that while also trying to at least sort out what the need is in terms of getting in there. It's always touchy. We work closely with the locals in terms of what makes the most sense in terms of that timing and approach. I know that in the case of a campfire, we set up a hotline that hopefully takes some of the load off the counties in terms of calls. But one of the things we encourage people to do, if you have something on your property that you're particularly concerned about that you want us to watch out for, we do that. We've returned wedding rings to people, which is always a nice thing. We always return firearms. There's tons of those, kind of in a scary way. It seems like every other parcel has those. We try to be accommodating in that way. I think the biggest challenge is, a couple folks will attest, is there's some well-intentioned nonprofits, like I think it's an arm of the Billy Graham Crusade that gets out, and Samaritan's Purse, and they tromp through the ash pile and sometimes unwittingly potentially put the person's parcel in jeopardy from being funded under phase 2. But more importantly, the people that are out there don't have proper PPE a lot of times, and they're going through an ash pile that has asbestos and is problematic. And so dealing with some of those well-intentioned nonprofits out there is some of the biggest challenges we've had at the front end.
Great point. I want to shift over to a training slide. John, I think, had a slide about the ICS training. And where do people get that training, the ICS 100 through 407 and 800? How do they access that?
I can take this one. I know I can send out the links for most of them. The first ones, I think 1, 2, and I think 100 and 200 are online. They can be done online. And 3 and 400 have to be done. It can be done in class, but it can be done virtually. But I can definitely send you links to where you can sign up for those classes. I think they're crucial for leaders, especially. So again, it really comes back down to the communication flow and how things are supposed to work. And we can always piecemeal things together as an instance going on, but it's a lot more effective if we have a base of knowledge and that we can some of those pathways are already built, so we can rely on them as we have to. Because again, when you look at preparation, emergency response, it always has a hard time of preparing, because what do we prepare for? Do we 100% prepare everything for a wildfire? That's fine, then we'll be great, except what happens when the earthquake happens, or when the flood happens, or the mudslide? It's one of these hard things. And so, getting a basic structure of communication, and we have to react at some point, but to be as prepared as we can before then is crucial. So I'll definitely send it out to you guys, and then you can send it out to the group.
Thank you very much for that. I want to ask one final question. I know we're
Tim, sorry, real quick on that. If you guys want a specialized training that's, we can take ICS for environmental health directors or something, Greg and I, we have some resources, and we could work with Jason and John with some contractor resources to maybe tweak that so it's a little more amenable to you guys. We could do that. So we should talk offline if that's of interest.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Tim,
we will follow up with that.
Tim, this is Marie Wood, and I want to add something to what you just asked. So the ER Emergency Response Committee, we finished the work of Marcy and Wes Nix on the training, the recommended training for disaster response workers. That's all been collated. I can send that to Jason, John, and the EPA bill. And you can see this is what we are recommending for environmental health disaster response workers. And all those classes that you've been talking about are on that list. So that will help you also to see what we're recommending. And I know CDPH, they put out a list. If you're on their email, SADA can help with that, of all the training resources that are coming out. And if you work with your emergency response director, also, they receive funding for training. In Sacramento County, we work closely with our director of emergency response, and we tell her our needs. And so she gets those classes in for us also. So there's different avenues and pathways. There's a lot of training out there. And they're doing a lot virtually now because of COVID, which makes it kind of nice because you don't have to travel.
Good. Thanks, Marie. Last question was really about, it seems like we're in wildfire season every year. And, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And, it's a lot on federal lands, the fires are, as well as on state and private lands. So it's a total teamwork issue. But I'm just, without getting political, I want to ask the question about what is the real problem here? And on the mitigation side of the emergency response wheel that I think John mentioned, what are we doing to get ahead of this? Not always to be in a reactive mode with a disaster. Anybody want to comment about anything you're seeing, any signs of hope out there for us?
Well, I can just, I know without getting political, within CARB, for instance, they have a whole unit that's looking at the prescribed burning program. And I know the governor's budget this year is putting a lot of funding towards, wildfire prevention and preparedness. And there's a lot of money in even going to the drought emergency. And so recognizing, the different impacts that are occurring with all these different emergencies, and looking at, and there's a lot of coordination that's occurring between the state and federal lands and mitigation measures, and using the term hardening. How do we better look at to mitigate these and prevent these catastrophic disasters, wildfires from occurring, and some of these weather events that are occurring that further propagate are outside of all of our control, right? When you have these winds that are these firestorms. But with that being said, without getting into specifics, there is within Natural Resources Agency and the other state agencies and CAL FIRE looking at mitigation measures and coordination with the federal lands, but there's a lot, I know, in a lot of detail and a lot to be worked out yet. And I'll turn it over to Bill for any additional comments.
Just real quick, we finally came out of the closet to have a disaster resilience team. As you might expect, there's a lot of crossover with sustainability and climate disruption. Yeah. And we're at the point now, there's the resources going into that. We have a coordinator for our disaster resilience team, Scott Stolman. We have a mitigation coordinator from our water shop, Suzanne Marr. She's been sitting in on a lot of the debris flow task force and watershed task force calls on the fires. So I think we'll have a much better plan of action, and there's a direction and a mandate from the White House to coordinate with all the federal agencies. We already coordinate well with the state, at least us in California. And so I think you'll see a lot more efficiencies and coordination in that regard. So that gives me a lot of hope. And then, unfortunately, we've learned a lot from the fires. We have a lot of data in terms of mapping potential debris flow and things like that. So hopefully we're taking those lessons learned and hopefully applying them.
Fantastic. Great panel, you guys. Marie, you want to close us up here, or Jeff?
Sorry, I have to get my camera.
There we go.
It's on the spot there.
All right. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, John, and for arranging Fed EPA to come and join your presentation. It was outstanding. It really gave a good, detailed, encompassing overview of what you are doing and how you can help. And the coordination is excellent. So I think as we move forward with our committee, with your efforts, we will get, I want to say, better at this. I hate to say that word, but at least we won't be in the dark. How's that? We won't be fumbling around, hopefully, and going, what do I do? There's a lot of experience out there. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming in and presenting to our group.
Great. Jeff, back to you.
With that, yes, I ditto what Marie had stated. Great presentations. Thank you all for participating in our training series here. And with that, just reminding those that are still on that we have the Excellence of Environmental Health next week. So please make yourself available for that. And with that, we will end the session. Thank you all.